Hello. Today's topic is the market equilibrium process from Chapter 6 in your textbook. I would highly recommend that before you go any further in this lecture, that you have read the first several pages of Chapter 6 that describes where markets come from, the idea of comparative advantage, the concept of Say's law, and the basics of the laws of supply and demand. This lecture is going to assume that you have read that material, so I will not go through in detail the basics of the laws of supply and demand. We'll do a quick overview, but we're going to jump right into the more difficult part of Chapter 6 today, which is a discussion on where prices come from and the consequences of the market equilibrium process being interrupted. So the bulk of what we're going to do today is Chapter 6, but I recommend that after you read Chapter 6, you then move on to Chapter 8 in your book if you're taking this class here at Valencia Community College, where we will talk about disruptions to the market equilibrium process as well. So first, as a quick review, you recall reading in your book about Say's law that supply creates demand, that we first have to have suppliers or entrepreneurs come up with an idea and show up in the marketplace saying, here is our idea, we think we can make money from this, and before we can have a demand for any good or service, these entrepreneurs need to appear to show us what they are in fact willing and able to sell. And you recall reading in Chapter 6 that supply curves slope upward and to the right. If we put price on the vertical axis and quantity supplied on the horizontal axis, we see that in the market for any good or service, that if a seller is saying to us, okay, at a price of P1, we are willing and able to supply you with QS1. This is the quantity supplied at this particular price. The sellers tell us, in our opinion, if you will pay us P2, we will increase our level of production to QS2. So by the law of supply, as prices increase, quantity supplied goes up. And you recall that's for two reasons. First of all, if we look at P1 times QS1, that is the total amount of revenue shaded in this area that a company could make from selling their product. If we look at P2 times QS2, it's this larger area of revenue that they could earn from selling a level of output at QS2. So under the very realistic assumption that more is better than less, we see that the supplier rationally pursues opportunities to increase production if they can make more money. Now, this is not a time to stop and say, well, what if the buyers don't want to pay P2? We're just looking at the motivation of the seller, and the seller tells us, the higher the price you're willing to pay, if you think about the housing boom during the years 2004, 2005, parts of 2006, as housing prices went up all over the United States, especially in Florida and Arizona and California, you saw more and more developers rushing in to clear land and build more houses. This is the case in any market. As price goes up, the seller sees this as an opportunity to make more revenue, and therefore they increase production. Conversely, it holds true that as price goes down, quantity supplied will go down. If we were to draw in P3 here, we see that at the price P3, moving over to the supply curve, they cut production to QS3. During 2009 and 10, Toyota had significant problems with many of their cars. In many cases, Toyota dealerships were forced to cut prices to encourage people to come in and still buy their cars. And there was a period of time where Toyota was reducing production at these lower prices because they couldn't make as much money on some of the cars that people had concerns about. Moving on to page 2, you recall when we looked at the concept of demand, the consumer has a different perspective on our willingness and ability to buy, and our perspective is illustrated by a negatively sloped demand curve where we tell the seller, just very quickly recall the seller tells us We have a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. You give us more money, we'll give you more stuff. The consumer has the opposite opinion. The consumer says, okay, look, if gasoline is selling for $2.60 a gallon, I'll buy 15 gallons a week. But if the price goes to $5 a gallon, I'm perhaps going to buy 8 gallons a week. The buyer says to the seller, as the price goes up, we are less willing and less able to purchase your product, so we're going to cut back. And also by what you read as the law of demand, if the price of gasoline goes to $1.10 a gallon, perhaps we take a couple more beach trips or leave our cars running longer outside a fast food restaurant, drive-through window, whatever. So as prices come down, consumers are more willing and able to purchase, and so they do. We buy more at lower prices than we do at higher prices. So this is just a quick recap. I encourage you to go, if you're confused at this point, you go back to your book and go through and reread this to prove to yourself why this is logical. Many students in my classes will say, well, it seems to make sense that demand could sometimes be a vertical curve. I had a student once at North Carolina State University many years ago tell me that they were an insulin-dependent diabetic. So at this price of insulin and this quantity demanded, they said, no matter what the price, I have to have insulin or I'll die. So they told me that as price goes up, quantity demanded stays the same. That's not true. For brief periods of time, it may be the case that if price goes up, you don't cut back on gasoline consumption, or maybe this person can't cut back on insulin production. But what if it's $20 a shot for insulin here and $500 a shot here? For those of you who know people who do use insulin, you can alter your diet, alcohol intake, exercise. You could slightly cut back on the consumption of insulin, and in markets like gasoline, of course, you can cut back even more. There is no such thing as a review as a vertical demand curve where no matter what the price, people will still buy the same amount of a particular good or service. Now, it is possible when it comes to supply curves, just very briefly, it is possible, you recall, for a supply curve in rare circumstances to be vertical. If we think about a rare painting where, let's say, it's Picasso is selling for $1 million and there was one original of that painting. If that price of that painting in the next auction goes to $25 million, there is still going to be one original of that painting. So in rare circumstances, sorry, I keep hitting the erase button, we can see prices going up and quantity supplied staying the same. But again, those are rare circumstances. The law of demand is always true. In the long run, the law of supply is always true. Even in a market for rare paintings, if the price went up to $25 million, you would see people trying to make more prints of that painting. You would see an increase in counterfeiting of that painting. Somebody would attempt to get us back to the laws of supply, or the law of supply where as price goes up, they increase production. All right, with that review out of the way, let's get started on the more difficult material from this chapter, which is where prices come from, the role prices play in our economy, the concept of fairness versus efficiency, how the government looks at the equilibrium process, and so forth. All right, I want you to imagine somebody that you know in your life where no matter what the subject is you're talking about with this person, you never reach an agreement, ever. You're the type of person that says, wow, what a beautiful blue sky, and they say, well, no, it's kind of gray, I think it might rain. And you're the type that says, I like this particular type of movie, and they say, no, this guy's the worst actor I've ever seen, whatever. So we all have somebody in our life, more than likely, that we don't agree with at all. Imagine being told that you're going to be put in a room with this person, and you've got to work on a significant problem, and you have 5 seconds to work out a solution, but you're not allowed to talk to one another in that 5 seconds. What are the odds you're going to reach an agreement or a conclusion with this person? Well, the odds are 0. But think about the process of buyers and sellers interacting with one another. It's very similar to that person you don't agree with. Recall, the seller says to us, The more money you give us, the more goods and services we will provide for you. And the buyers say, well, the more money you charge, the less we're willing and able to purchase. And the sellers say, well, if we can't get a very high price, we don't want to produce that much of this product. And the buyers say, well, if you don't charge us that much, we'll buy a lot of it. So you can see very clearly that the supplier and the demander have an opposite view of what ought to take place in the market. I mean, look, the gas stations would love to be able to charge us $50,000 a gallon. We'd like to get gasoline for free, or even better than free. How about a negative price of $5 a gallon, where every time you show up to buy gasoline, they give you $5. So if you buy $10 worth of gas, they give you $50 and you drive away. So a negative price or a price of zero would be wonderful for us, and $5,000 or $50,000 or $5 million would be a wonderful price for the people that sell us gasoline. So how do we get to a point where the sellers who want $5,000 for gas and the buyer who wants to get it for free, how do we reach an agreement when, if you think about it, we don't talk to one another? We don't. There are no congressional hearings. There's no riots, no email campaigns, no boycotts. They don't call us to ask us what we think about prices. Most of your gasoline purchases involve you showing up at a pump, putting in a card, not speaking to anybody, nobody speaking to you, after you've looked up at a price and said, okay, that $2.60 or $4 or whatever the case might be is fine for today, and you get your gasoline and you leave. So today we're going to try to clearly illustrate where $2.60 comes from for gasoline, or where $20 million a year for a basketball player comes from, or where a 4% interest rate comes from. Anything that has a price, and this is very important, if it has a price, that price has been created, not fixed, created by the forces of supply and demand. Adam Smith said, it's as if there is an invisible hand that leads to an end which was not part of our intention. It's not my intention as a buyer to help the seller make profit. And believe me, it's not the seller's intention to serve us and see to it that we have ceiling fans that work, or air conditioners that work, or gasoline that makes our cars go. They're self-interested. If you recall the teachings of Adam Smith in your book, the seller is self-interested, the buyers are self-interested, but we have to come together or a market cannot take place. And when we come together, Smith said, it's as if there is an invisible hand, or this unseen force that creates an end or a market condition that was not part of our intention. We didn't intend to help one another, but we ultimately end up helping one another. Okay, taking a look at the graph we have here, you see in your book, or you saw in your book, that I used an example of a dream recorder as a mythical product that doesn't yet exist. I do this in all of my books when I teach supply and demand analysis, because I want to use something that doesn't exist so we can speculate as to what prices might be. Well, I want to try something different today under the same idea of something that doesn't exist yet, or at least as of today in July of 2010 it doesn't exist, but a product I wish existed. I don't know about you, but when I drive down the road and I see people weaving in and out of lanes or slowing down to 12 miles an hour in a 70-mile-an-hour zone, I have discovered that it's not raging alcoholics out on the roads, it's raging texters out on the roads. Now, I know that some of you may text while you're driving. If you do, I will reserve telling you that you are selfish, stupid, or ignorant. I'll let somebody else say that. I'll just say that what I would like to see somebody invent is a device that I can put in my car, because I don't text ever while I'm driving. That's because I don't own a cell phone. Yes, that's right. Here I plan on being the only person in the 21st century to never own one of these annoying devices. So I don't even have the capability of texting. So as a non-cell phone owning, non-texting person who has to deal with the maniacs that are out on the roads every day texting, I would like a device that I could buy for my car where as I'm driving down the road, anytime within 100 feet of me there is someone texting, a little alarm goes off in my car so I can be more alert that somebody is out there unwittingly trying to kill me. So this would be a wonderful thing. The problem is, as of today, this device doesn't exist. So going back to the beginning of chapter 6, you remember going through your determinants of supply. We don't have the technology yet. Nobody's worked out a way to cover the cost of doing this yet. There's no sellers serving the market. And certainly we have to wait for Say's law. We have to wait for the entrepreneur to come up with the idea and then put it out in the marketplace to see if there'd even be a demand for this type of good or service. But I would like to see this product exist. Now, what we're going to do next is show, if this product ever does come out, we're going to show the distinct role that prices play in creating a mutually agreed upon price for this particular alarm system. So the heading now is the role of prices. This is the most important part of chapter 6, the 4 distinct roles that prices play. Going to the next page for just a moment. In your book, you saw that prices help to prevent barter. Barter, you may recall, is trading goods and services for other goods and services. So very briefly, because 2, 3, and 4 in this list are much more important, barter still takes place today. In fact, during the recession that we were in from 2007 through 2009, there were a lot of articles about how people were engaging in barter in this economy. Barter, of course, centuries ago was the common way things got done before the creation of currency and coinage and what have you. But barter, we should be appreciative of the existence of prices, if for no other reason that it prevents barter. Imagine trying to buy 1 gallon of gasoline in an economy where there was no such thing as prices. You would pull up to the gas station, and you would notice about 413 people in line, and they would be in line holding things, because in a barter economy it requires something called the double coincidence of wants, meaning at the exact same time I want what you have, you want what I have, and then we trade. So there would be all of these people in line, and the clerk would be there at the gas station, and after probably 7 or 8 hours, it would be your turn to approach the clerk, and the clerk would say, okay, what is it that you want today? And you would say, well, I would like to get 15 gallons of gas. And in a barter economy, the clerk would then say, well, what did you bring? And you could say, well, I brought 6 kittens that my sister's cat just had, and I brought some used blue jeans and some Vanilla Ice CDs, and I've got a half a 6-pack of beer here. And you would just have to hope that this person likes Vanilla Ice, and that they want used jeans, and they need some kittens, and that they drink beer. Because if they don't, they might tell you, well, look, I don't need any of this stuff, so you need to go back home and get some other stuff and then come back here. Can you imagine what things would be like if we did not have prices? Today, we pull up, we look up at the marquee, we see what the price is, and we decide just like this, how many gallons am I going to buy from here, how many gallons. We know immediately whether we're going to be involved in the market transaction or we're going to move on and buy it somewhere else or buy it on another day. So the fact that the establishment of prices helps us prevent this inefficiency of trading, that's a wonderful feature of a market economy based on prices. And you might say, well, aren't all economies based on prices? Well, in North Korea, the former Soviet Union, Cuba, prices don't matter as much. Because as we'll see in Chapter 8, government controls prices. It doesn't allow prices to freely change, and therefore it creates tremendous disruptions to the market process. The second role of prices convey information. Okay, let's go back to the previous screen and take a look. Prices convey information. Let's suppose this little texting while driving alarm system does come out. And let's suppose when it first comes out, it's $399. Now the seller, a lot of this is trial and error when a new product comes out. They can do marketing research. They can ask people in surveys, what do you think you'd be willing to pay for this? They certainly know what it cost them to make it, what it may cost to get the patents and things like this. But ultimately, with new products, you're kind of guessing, well, what will people pay? And you don't really know until you come out with it. But notice, as soon as they put $399 on this product, that's the seller's way of conveying information to the buyer. And the information is, we believe that $399 is a price that will help us cover our costs and earn profit on the sale of our private property. This is our product, and if you would like to get this product from us, we're not going to say whether $399 is a fair price. That's up for you to decide. But we're just saying that this is what we want for it. Now, at $399, what you can do is come straight over to the supply curve and come down, and let's say at first the seller is producing 10,000 of these per month, just in a hypothetical case. Notice, however, that at $399, if you come way over to the demand curve and stop here and come down, remember from chapters 4 and 5 on graphing, this point is the origin where both values equal 0. I'm going to use my eraser for just a second. Get this out of the way. This is the origin, so anything moving in this direction is an increase in quantity. Anything moving this direction is a decrease in quantity, and of course the same with prices going up and down. So they introduce the product. They start out by producing 10,000, but you'll see way over here that 50,000 people have indicated to the seller that they are willing and able to purchase this alarm system at $399. We're going to call this point A, where quantity supplied is 10,000, and over here where quantity demanded is 50,000, we'll call this point B. All right. So the information the seller conveyed is clear, $399 to obtain this. The buyer receives this information, the $399, processes it, ascertains whether or not $399 is what they're willing and able to pay. Of course, not everybody's willing and able to pay $399. Some people might think it's worth more than $399. But in this particular case, 50,000 consumers have appeared at electronic stores or car stores around the country, and they have indicated, I am willing and able to pay $399 for one of these systems. But you can see, you should be able to see right away we have a problem. Quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. And from here to here, where quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, we have what economists call a shortage. It's not called a scarcity, it's called a shortage. Now's a good time to clear up some economic misconceptions. Most people believe that when a shortage exists, if you asked people to look at this situation and say, why is there a shortage of this alarm system? Most people would point to this issue right here and say, well, the problem is the seller only made $10,000 a month. But that's not the problem. The problem and the problem is also not that too many people wanted to buy this good or service. In a free market, when a shortage exists, the problem is that the seller did not charge the correct price. Now, this is where it begins to open up a can of worms, so to speak, for many students. They say, now hold on a second. What do you mean the seller didn't charge the correct price? Well, anytime, let's say, I remember when these silly vampire movies were coming out, and my teenage daughter said she was going to be the first one in line to go see one of them at midnight, whatever the case was. I indicated to her, well, what are you going to do to make sure you get a ticket? She said, well, I'm going to show up 2 or 3 hours early, whatever it was at the mall. But all around the country, when these movies came out, the first day, there was a shortage of tickets. The movies were selling out. This is not because there weren't enough theaters or they didn't show the movie enough times. This is because the theaters missed out on a golden opportunity to tell teenage girls all over the United States of America, look, we normally charge $7 to go to the movie, but you people are going crazy over vampire love stories. So here's the deal. For the first weekend at least, or the first few days, it's not going to be our normal $7 or $8 to go to the movies. How about $15? Now, before you fall under the temptation of saying, well, that's not fair, let me remind you, this issue of fairness is going to come up more than once today, and it comes up many times in your book. It is impossible to define fairness when it comes to how markets work. Your perception of fairness is different than everybody else listening to this lecture right now. I think it's perfectly fair that professional athletes make $20 million a year. What do I care? They are selling their services to the buyers, the owners of these teams, and the owners think that it's fine to give them $20 million a year. I think it's perfectly fair that somebody who plays basketball makes $20 million a year while I make a whole lot less than $20 million a year. And I've had people say, well, don't educators provide more services to our fellow man than a basketball player? Perhaps we do. But the free market has said that since there's a huge supply of people who can teach and not as big a demand for people who can teach, but there's a very small supply of people who can play basketball or other sports at a world-class level and a huge demand for them. After all, you're taking this class not out of enjoyment, but you go to a basketball game for enjoyment, and people are willing to pay hundreds of dollars a ticket in some cases, and the networks pay billions of dollars to broadcast these games. So bigger demand for basketball players, smaller supply. Smaller demand for educators, bigger supply. So the market process has created a far lower salary for me than LeBron James or Dwayne Wade. I'm fine with that. You may think it's morally reprehensible. How long would it take for us to reach an agreement? We might never reach an agreement because, remember, fairness is in the eye of the beholder. Your perception of fairness is going to be different than my perception of fairness. So when we study how markets work, we try not to get bogged down in the fairness question because we don't learn anything. So in looking at this particular situation, the information being conveyed from the buyer to the seller is, hey, seller, your price was too low. Now, that may sound absurd because I doubt any of you have ever gone into a situation where somebody sold out of something, concert ticket, whatever, that you wanted to buy, and you went to the seller and said, listen, why didn't you charge a higher price so I could have a better chance of coming to this event? If you would have charged more money, some people wouldn't have paid, I would have had a better chance, the line would have been shorter, whatever the case might be. We don't think this way. But the communication, like Adam Smith said, the invisible hand, it's all unspoken. It's implicit. The fact that all 10,000 of these little alarm systems have sold, and there's still 40,000 people left over who are telling Radio Shack or whatever sort, look, we want one of the alarm systems too. The fact that there's now people getting on a waiting list or standing in line, that information gets sent back to the seller where the seller of this alarm system says, wow, this is interesting. We produce $10,000 a month. That's what we could profitably afford to produce at $399. 50,000 people a month are looking for this thing. So every month we have a backlog of orders and a waiting list. So it appears the buyers are telling us that we could actually charge more money, and they would be willing to pay more money, some of them, in order to hurry up and get one of these alarm systems so they don't get plowed under on the highways by people who text. So this shortage begins to put pressure on prices. Anytime there's a shortage, there's upward pressure. The invisible hand comes in and starts forcing prices upward. So let's suppose, under the assumption the customer is always right, the customer is telling the producer, please raise your prices. So the producer says, okay, we will do that. Let's suppose the price goes up to $449. Okay, $449. Now let's go over to the next page for just a moment. This brings us to the third role of prices. Prices direct resources to their most valued use. Sorry for the terrible handwriting. The technology here is fine. I just don't write very well. Prices direct resources to their most valued use. This entire list is in your textbook, as you know from your reading. So let's move back to the previous page and see how that works. All right, at $449, by the law of supply, the seller now says, okay, great. We can now get more money, so we'll give you more stuff. And so production increases to 20,000 units per month. So at $449, they're able to cover more of the cost of extra materials, extra workers, shipping things through FedEx or whatever the case might be. And they tell the consumer, we are now going to produce more. So from A to C, this is where the third role of prices appears. Now think of it this way. The third role is prices direct resources to their most valued use. The resources we're talking about here are the materials, the labor, anything involved in the production of this radar system. Suppose this company has the ability of producing standard, I think I said radar, I meant alarm system. But suppose this company has the ability of making radar detectors so you'll know when a highway patrolman is out on the highway, but they also have the resources to make, let's suppose the same company that can make these little alarms to let you know when texters are out there. If the company sees that it's getting one price for radar detectors, but it's getting a lot higher price for these alarm systems, the company will use that higher price, this $449, as a signal to them to direct or guide their resources to its most valued use, the production of these alarm systems. So you might actually see the company cutting back on radar detectors that's getting a lower, less profitable price, and increase the production of these alarm systems. This is the way markets work. And if you think about this, it's a common misconception that whenever prices go up, it's bad for consumers. But if you use logic and not emotion, you can see here that from A to C, it's actually a good thing that prices have gone up for many of the consumers. Because when prices go from $3.99 to $4.49, now the seller has the proper incentives to increase production. And when they increase production, it increases the likelihood that we will get what we want, which is the alarm system. We'll have to pay more for it, in this case about $50 more, but now we're being served. And I don't know about you, but every time I go out to the marketplace, I go to be served. I don't want to fight traffic and go all the way to a mall or a store or whatever just to be told, sorry, we're all sold out, we'll get it next week. I'm not here next week, I'm here now, and I want to be served right now. I don't want to hear about shortages or waiting lists or it may come in. And I know of circumstances that I've been in, and probably you've been in as well, where if the clerk would have said, now listen, we're technically all sold out, but we have a few in the back. If you'd be willing to pay an extra $30 or $40, I'll go get you one. I can think of many situations. Happens to me at nice restaurants where I'll go in and they'll say, well, it's going to be about an hour wait. But if the hostess says, look, we actually have a table open right now. If you'll give me $20, I'll seat you next. Given my bad attitude that comes from a blood sugar issue when I get really hungry, I'll give them $20 in a heartbeat to get the next table. So higher prices directs these resources into where they should be, and that's a good thing for us. The fourth role of prices, if I can go back to the next page, and this is the most controversial one. Prices ration scarce goods and services. This is the one that people fuss about the most. Okay, notice at $449, if we go over to the demand curve and call this point D and come straight down. Now, let's say this figure has dropped to 40,000. So from B to D, the fourth roll of prices, the rationing roll, kicks in. To ration something is a way of distributing something that is scarce. Okay. If you think about situations where we don't have a market, I know when I was a kid we lived next to a field that was almost 100 yards long, and our neighbor kept it mowed down real well. So a lot of the kids from surrounding neighborhoods used to always want to come down and play football or fly kites or whatever the case might be. Sometimes more kids showed up than my mom expected, so she had to ration the cookies and Kool-Aid by watering down the Kool-Aid a little bit, maybe breaking the cookies in half, whatever the case might be. Well, in a free market, we don't have a mommy to ration Kool-Aid and cookies to us, or ration this alarm system, or ration anything to us. In a free market, the rationing roll of prices means this. When the price goes up, in this case from $3.99 to $4.49, the scarce alarm systems are rationed to only those people who are most willing and most able to pay. Everybody else is weeded out of the marketplace. Now, some of you may hear this and say, okay, so what? We'll get to the so what in just a moment. But first to the technical details. So now notice what's happened. Now the shortage, we still have a shortage, is from here to here. You could argue that in many ways it's a good thing when prices go up for some consumers for two reasons. First, we saw by the resource directing role of prices, when prices go up, it encourages the seller to produce more of the good or service. And second, when prices go up, we can see here by the rationing role that some of your competitors have dropped out of the market. You have to understand, sellers aren't the only ones that face competition. We, as buyers, face competition as well. Sometimes the competition isn't that intense. There's plenty of milk at the grocery store for everybody. So we don't show up there and have to fight over the milk because it's in a shortage situation. But when there are shortages and prices go up, as prices go up, if you're still willing and able to pay, you're still in the marketplace, you're still able to successfully compete. But the people that, you may have some people that are willing to pay $4.49 in this case, but not able. Some people might be able but not willing. They just don't think the product is worth it. So all of those people, for those reasons, drop out of the marketplace. So 10,000 of your competitors, if you wanted to buy this alarm system, 10,000 of your competitors have dropped out of the market. And so now a shortage that was 40,000 units per month is only 20,000 units per month, and a smaller shortage means it's going to be sooner rather than later that you will finally get the alarm system that you're willing and able to buy. Think of it this way. The free market, and this is a critical way to understand how this works. The free market, you could argue, based on this rationing system, plays a significant or the free market practices what you could call discrimination. Now, I know many of you, as soon as you hear the word discrimination, you say, whoa, I don't know if I like that. I've been taught the word discrimination is bad. Well, of course, discrimination based on race and gender and religion. We all know that those forms of discrimination, the human form that picks people and says, well, I just don't like people of this particular color, you could argue all day long the immorality of being that way. But discrimination in the free market means this. The free market does not care about your race, your religion. It doesn't care about your ethnicity. It doesn't care about your gender. The free market doesn't practice discrimination in any of the ways flawed human beings practice discrimination. The free market practices discrimination based only on ability to pay. Think of it this way. I mentioned LeBron James earlier. LeBron James, multi-millionaire basketball player, okay? He never went to college. He graduated from high school in Ohio. He's at the time this lecture is being delivered, he's in his mid-20s, okay? And he belongs to a particular ethnicity that still today in the United States of America has overall, on average, lower annual earnings than other races do. So let's get this straight. You've got an African-American male in his 20s who just graduated from high school, nothing more. He fits within a profile where many African-American males in America that have just graduated from high school don't earn a lot of money. Well, it's same for white males in their 20s that just got out of high school. But among African-American males, the earnings on average are even lower. Now let's compare LeBron James to me, okay? I spent several years in college. I'm in my 40s. I'm a white male, and white males on average earn more than white males in their 40s with advanced college degrees who are professionals tend to earn a lot more money than younger white or black or Hispanic males in their 20s who just went to high school. But suppose LeBron James and I went out to buy a yacht today. If we were both in the yacht dealership and the owner of the yacht dealership saw both of us in there and the owner did not know who either one of us who we were, the yacht dealer might be inclined to come up and talk to me first. After all, I mean, if I came in a jacket, white male in their 40s, there are probably more white males in their 40s who own yachts than there are young black males in their 20s who own yachts. That's just common sense. So he might come to me first. When we go back into the room to talk about buying a yacht, and he starts filling out the information, and he finally gets to the point where he asks me about my income, at some point, the yacht dealer is going to look at me and say, sir, you've made a mistake. This is a yacht selling business, not a yacht renting business. And based on your income, you have enough money to rent a yacht, maybe for a couple of weeks, but you're going to have to go home now because we're going to have to discriminate against you. You don't have the ability to pay for a new yacht. So I leave, and he goes back out, and LeBron James is still there. And he goes to LeBron James, again, not knowing who he is, and asks him if he can help him. And LeBron James says, yeah, I was looking at these two yachts. And he goes back into the room with LeBron James, and he starts filling out information there. And he gets to LeBron James' income. And he says to LeBron James, which of the yachts were you wanting to buy? And LeBron James says, both of them, in cash. LeBron James, a young African-American male in his 20s with only a high school degree, is going to successfully overcome discrimination. He won't face discrimination that day. In fact, with his income, maybe if he wanted to buy the Empire State Building, he might face discrimination. He might not have the ability to pay for that, but there's very little discrimination that LeBron James faces. I face a lot more discrimination than he does, and other people face more discrimination than I do. But the free market boils it down to that. Do you have the ability to pay? And if you do, these goods and services are available to you, and we don't care about race or anything else. So in many ways, you could argue, if you were to choose to discuss the fairness of the market system, I mean, it'd be pretty easy to argue, okay, that seems kind of fair. It doesn't look at who we are and our personality, our looks. It just says open your wallet. And if you have enough in there, we're good. And if you don't, you have to go home and try to figure out a way to overcome discrimination. And of course, in a free market, and if you recall from reading chapters 2 and 3, overcoming discrimination in a free market means making yourself better educated, more productive, serving your fellow man in such a way where your fellow man is willing to give you more money. And the more money your fellow man is willing to give you because of your skills, education, and training, the more over time you will be able to fight discrimination. Okay, back to the issue here and where prices ultimately come from. So we see that there's still a shortage of this good or service. So suppose the seller gets carried away. I mean, if there's a shortage, Adam Smith is still there, the invisible hand is still there, putting upward pressure on prices. And since this is a new product, the seller doesn't know exactly where to stop. So it's not so simple for you to look at this and say, why doesn't the seller just stop where supply and demand intersect? They don't know exactly where it intersects. So suppose the seller raises the price to $609. And in this case, at $609. We go over to point E, and the seller is now producing 45,000 units. So by the law of supply and the resource directing role of prices, the seller says, okay, if we can get $609, we will produce 45,000 a month. But now we come to the law of demand. We go from $609 to the demand curve here at point F, and the buyers are saying, well, hold on a second. Now, only 15,000 of us are willing and able to pay. So in this particular situation, from here to here, sorry, I keep hitting the erase button, between E and F, we see that quantity supplied is now greater than quantity demanded, and we have a surplus of these alarm systems. Going back to the second role of prices, a surplus means that the buyers are telling the sellers, your price is too high. And in this particular case, the buyers have a legitimate argument. Well, 15,000 buyers, as we see, still think $609 is an acceptable price. But everybody else is saying, look, we're not going to pay this. So back to economic fallacies. Just like it's a fallacy to say when there's a shortage, the seller didn't produce enough, when in reality the truth is they didn't charge a high enough price. When there's a surplus, as the seller, you don't say to yourself, well, it appears we've produced too much. No, the truth is you're charging the wrong price. You're charging a price that is too high. Enter the invisible hand. The invisible hand comes in and guides the seller. We know the sellers are self-interested. A surplus means the inventory is just sitting there every month, and they keep producing, and most of it keeps sitting there. So the invisible hand comes in and tells the seller, look, you've got three choices. You can leave the prices where they are and maintain the surplus. You could raise the price and have an even bigger surplus. Or, if you want to get rid of these things, you need to lower your price. And suppose the seller says, okay, we'll have a sale, and we'll lower prices to $559. At $559, notice what goes on here very carefully. First of all, the seller cuts back on production. We're moving right along the supply curve where the seller says, okay, we can't afford to keep producing 45,000 units if we can only get $559. Just like you would tell your boss, I can't afford to keep coming into work here if you're only going to pay me $1 an hour. You would cut back on your hours if that's all you could get. But now the buyers are excited because the buyers now see the prices come down, so more of them jump back in. And so moving along the demand curve, we see quantity demanded going up. So the seller cuts back on production. More buyers come back into the market. So now we reach a point where they intersect, let's say at 30,000 units. And at this point, we have reached what economists call market equilibrium. In equilibrium, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Now, let's say several things here. First of all, the equilibrium price. In the real world, how do we know when we're in equilibrium? Because in the real world, do you drive around looking at billboards seeing supply and demand curves? No. In the real world, businesses don't sit around and have spreadsheets showing supply and demand curves. In the real world, how do we know? Well, first of all, in the real world, if you ever see long lines or waiting lists or companies having to put people in a lottery to distribute something, that's an indication that there's a shortage. If you see prices going up for something, that's an indication that the shortage is being dealt with by prices increasing. Okay, so in the real world, those are the signs. How do we know there's a shortage? Well, when you see things flying off the shelves. This summer, I guess this new iPhone came out, and there were long lines and shortages all over the country, all over the world, in fact. Well, the fact that people were lined up and some people didn't get served was an indication, just like when Microsoft updates Xbox and people sleep in the street the night before so they can have the latest video gaming system. These are indications of a shortage. Well, we often notice what happens, for example, with Xbox. The day after they come out, people are selling them for hundreds of dollars more on eBay because they're fixing the shortage. They're saying, okay, these are worth more, and people are willing to pay more. In the real world, how do we know if there's a surplus? Well, Anytime you see at your business or any other business where there's inventory that's not moving, the quantity supplied being greater than quantity demanded, at this time here in Florida, there's still a pretty big surplus of homes because of the housing problem and the recession. You're seeing a lot of homes. There's a lot more homes being supplied than there are homes being demanded. Okay, so that's one indication of a surplus. And when you see prices coming down, and housing prices have come down at this particular point in time, that's the free market fixing the surplus. So it stands by logical deduction that whenever you see prices staying relatively stable for any period of time, while they're stable, the market is in an equilibrium condition. When there's a fairly even flow of products coming in and coming out, that's an indication of an equilibrium condition. And so here, the invisible hand finally creates this scenario where the buyers who are left in the market, who are willing and able to pay $5.59, are going to be served immediately. And the sellers that are left in the market, those who can profitably provide this for $5.59, they're going to be able to sell all the alarm systems that they bring in. Second point to make about equilibrium, this does not mean we've reached the fairest price. Again, can't define fairness. Think about it for a moment. Many consumers can say $559 is unfair. They can say, these guys used to charge $399. What a ripoff. Now they're charging $559. Are those consumers correct? Well, sure. And surely not. They're correct because it's their opinion that they're now being ripped off. But somebody else might say, hey, $559 is fair to me. I've been waiting all this time to get it, and now it's here. So who's right? Some of the sellers can complain. They can say, look, we ordered all of these alarm systems when we thought we could sell them for $609, and now they didn't sell, and we can only sell them for $559. We're making less profit. This is unfair to us. Well, who's right? Both, and therefore neither. Some of the sellers they're right to say it was unfair because it's a perception that they should have been able to get more. Other sellers might say, well, it's fair. I mean, I'm able to sell for $559. I've just got to cut my costs somewhere else or whatever. So the market equilibrium price and output says nothing about fairness because it can't be defined. But it is the most efficient outcome. Once we reach market equilibrium, no more shortage, no more wasting your time, no more lines, no more lists, no more driving around to see if you can find it. For the sellers, no more charging a price that's below what you actually could get for the good or service. And when we have a market equilibrium condition, we get rid of all the surpluses, so no more bulging inventory, no more people paying $609 when if they had just waited a little while, they could get it for $559 and would have saved money. So in the equilibrium condition, we have reached the point of maximum efficiency. But whether or not it's fair, that's up to you to decide. Okay, to close out today, I want to show you a couple of things from chapter 8. Let's see, get a new page. I think I'm doing this right. Okay. What happens, very briefly, when the government looks at the market equilibrium process and decides that it's not working well in terms of the final price? Well, you recall when we were looking at the situation where prices are going up, and we talked about the discrimination function and the rationing function and the debate on fairness, voters often pick politicians who want to promote some ecumenical definition of fairness rather than just telling the voters. I mean, think about it for a second. If voters believe that interest rates on credit cards are too high, and just recently Congress passed legislation to put a limit on what banks can charge in terms of interest on credit cards and what they can charge for banking fees and what have you. If the voters go to the politicians and say, we believe the banks are ripping us off, what politician in his or her right mind is going to look at the voters and say, listen, the banks are private institutions. You have an interest in having a cheap credit card. You don't have a right to a cheap credit card. The banks don't have to, they have no obligation to be forced to give you a credit card at a low interest rate. You're going to a private entity and asking them to give you money, to extend you credit, and we're not going to interfere with the interest rate they charge you. You can read, if it says 21%, you can read, don't sign it if you think 21% is too high. If you don't think it's fair, move on to another company or pay in cash. Don't get a credit card. So think about a politician saying, we're just going to leave the market alone, and people with good credit will get low interest and people with bad credit will get high interest. Most voters don't like the brutal honesty that is associated with market efficiency. They often ask the government to create market fairness. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of where this is the case. First of all, I mentioned to you that the government is pursuing legislation to place a limit over time in what banks can charge in interest rates and fees for their customers. All right, let's just say that in the market equilibrium condition for college students, the market-going interest rate is 24.99% on a credit card. College students don't have as stable employment history and less income, etc. So the banks say, all right, you're a greater risk, many of you, and so actually for price, P equals I stands for interest rates. Let me erase where it says $sign here for just a moment. So the interest rate is 24.99%. And in equilibrium, we're at Q1, where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. The voters tell the politician the banks are evil and corrupt, and they're predatory lenders, and they're mean, so please do something to help us. So Congress looks at the fact that only those people who are willing and able to pay 24.99% on their purchases as college students will be able to get credit. If you're not, you're weeded out of the market, you're discriminated against, pay cash, save up, and move on with your life. But Congress cares about fairness because Congress cares about votes and the voters care about fairness. So Congress comes in and says, okay, we're going to place a price ceiling of 12.99%. Why do I keep using the $sign? I don't know. Okay, so here we go. Now you look at this and say, wait a minute, shouldn't a ceiling be somewhere pretty high on the graph? No, think of it this way. Right, here's the origin. Congress tells the banks, you can charge anything you want up to 12.99%, but once you get there, you've hit the ceiling. You can't charge any more than this. Well, you recall in Chapter 1 reading about the law of unintended consequences. Two things are going to happen. First of all, a lot more people are going to apply for credit cards. So if we call this QD1 and QS1 to show the initial quantity demanded and quantity supplied in equilibrium, a lot more people are going to enter the market looking for a credit card. So quantity demanded is going to go up by the law of demand. But now many banks are going to be less willing to provide credit to people who aren't good credit risk. Because they're going to, why should the banks say, okay, you only make $12,000 a year, you've only been working for a year, we've got some concerns that you may not pay the money back, and then we have to eat it if you file for bankruptcy. So the bank tells you, look, at 24.99%, it's worth it. We can cover our costs if some of you file for bankruptcy. At 12.99%, we can't. So what's going to happen is that the quantity of credit supplied to younger people goes down while quantity demanded goes up. And by forcing the price, in the name of fairness again, by forcing the price below equilibrium, you end up creating a shortage. You will notice, going forward, far fewer applications, far more banks turning down your application to establish credit. So in the name of being fair to people, now the banks say, look, we've got to cover our risk, and we cannot extend credit to as many of you at 12.99%. So a law designed to help younger and poorer people ends up unwittingly hurting some of the very people that the government was trying to help by placing a cap on what banks can charge for interest. The same thing applies here in Florida to price gouging laws. Let's think about this logically for just a moment. If we take a look at price gouging laws, okay? Here we have the demand for and supply of gasoline. And let's say that you have a situation where gas, back in 2008, I believe it was, gas was $4 a gallon in equilibrium. Many people were calling for the government to place a cap on gasoline. Same situation. At the time when the equilibrium was 2, had they placed a cap on it, the quantity of gasoline demanded would have gone up because the gas stations were having to pay. This is what a lot of people understand. The gasoline stations make pennies on the dollar in terms of profit. They make far more money on selling magazines and soft drinks and what have you in the store than they do on gasoline. Since the gasoline stations were paying almost $4 a gallon back then to get the gas, if the government would have pushed prices down to $2, you would have seen many gas stations stop selling gas altogether. You would have seen a lot more yellow bags hanging over the pumps, and it would have created, just like it did in the 1970s when government placed a cap on gasoline and other food and other goods and services on the prices, it created shortages all over the United States of America. And this is why economists often say that no law that human beings can write ever can end up triumphing over the laws of supply and demand. So when government steps in and says, we just want to control prices a little bit, we want to help people, the result is shortages every time. And if you take a look at the extreme case, the former Soviet Union, Cuba, North Korea, when the government controlled the price of everything, people in the former Soviet Union and today in North Korea and Cuba stand in line hours a day waiting and hoping to get goods and services. The prices are held down so low that a lot more people show up. The seller's incentives to supply the good or service has been destroyed by the government, so you have shortages for everything. And of course, that leads to black markets where you go behind the store, and if you're willing to pay cash and a lot higher price, you'll be able to get these goods and services. Our own government has done this. During World War II, the government created price ceilings on goods and services, sugar and many other products, and it created shortages in black markets even during a time of national crisis. Let's take a look at another example. Let's suppose the government says, okay, in the market for labor, where we have the wage rate is the price of labor and quantity. Here's the demand for labor, the supply of labor. I don't know why this, excuse me for a moment. Sometimes the government, instead of fixing prices and pushing them down to help us fight discrimination, sometimes the government looks at how much money we're earning per hour and says, okay, we can fight discrimination 2 ways. We can either force prices down, and we just saw that with the gasoline and credit card example, or we can force your wages up under the assumption that many people operate under, that businesses pay unfair wages that are too low. Now, first, a remark on behalf of free markets. I would encourage you to think of it this way. In a free market, one that the government leaves alone as long as we're not violating rights to life, liberty, and property. In a free market, plain and simple, you create your own minimum wage. Meaning, in a free market, think about it, you have a lot of people who make 20, 30, hundreds of dollars an hour as engineers, nurses, pharmacists, athletes, educators, whatever the case might be. In a free market, your wage is created by the demand for you and the supply of people like you. The more rare you are, the smaller the supply, and therefore the smaller the supply of people who can do what you do. And the greater the demand for people who can do what you do, the greater will be your wage rate. For people that work at fast food restaurants, let's say in Detroit, Michigan, a very poor metropolitan area, let's suppose that $6 an hour at a local fast food restaurant, here we have the initial equilibrium where the quantity of labor demanded equals the quantity of labor supplied. And remember, we are the suppliers. The workers are the suppliers and the companies are the demanders. Let's suppose $6 an hour is what in a free market people would get for making hamburgers. The reason for that, think about the supply of people who can make a hamburger. There's 300 and some odd million people in America, 160-something million of them are in the labor force, meaning they're 16 years of age or older. Around 160 million people know how to make a hamburger. That's a huge supply of people who have this skill. The demand for people that can make hamburgers isn't as great as it is as the demand for pharmacists or engineers or doctors or what have you. So with a fairly small demand and a huge supply, $6 an hour, that's the free market wage. And the free market economist would tell the person making $6 an hour, if you do not like $6 an hour, you need to fix yourself. You need to look around at jobs that pay $9 and gain information about what you have to do to acquire the skill, education, and training to put yourself in the $9 market. And once you end up in the $9 market, if 9 is too low and you'd rather get 19, gain information about which jobs pay 19 and undertake the necessary steps to acquire those skills, and someday you'll make 19. Now, many of you hearing this say, well, that sounds cruel. But I would ask you, just as, I guess, a side note to this lecture, which is more cruel? Is it cruel to tell people, if you'll look at the free market, you'll see that there are many different jobs that pay more than you make, and so like Chris Gardner in The Pursuit of Happiness, you can look at yourself, you can see, wow, stockbrokers make more than I'm making, so I'm going to do something about it. Is it cruel to tell people, look at the free market and go fix yourself? Or is it cruel, for example, to have government, President Obama, while he was running for president, said he wanted the minimum wage to be $9.50 per hour. Let's take a look at the economics of cruelty for just a moment. Now, this is an example of what economists call a price floor. Now, this is the government telling businesses, you can pay anything you want above $9.50, $29.50, $109.50, whatever, but we're not going to let wages go below this floor. We're not going to let them fall to $6. And again, I've got to use the eraser for a second to clean this up. All right. So the government establishes this floor of $9.50. Let's take a look at what the reaction is. Laws of supply and demand supersede the laws of man. First of all, the quantity of labor supplied is going to go up. The number of people willing and able to look for a job at $9.50 is going to increase. Secondly, the quantity of labor demanded is going to go down. The number of businesses that are going to be willing and able to hire people for $9.50 is going to go down. Now, some of you look at this and say, it's only $3.50 an hour. Get your calculator out. Take a business with 40 workers, paying them $6 an hour, and they're working 40 hours a week, and just do the multiplication. Add another $3.50 times 40 hours a week, times 40 workers, times 4 weeks a month, and very quickly you'll see that that business's production costs will go up by thousands of dollars a month. In a good economy, most small businesses have very thin profit margins, 2 or 3%. In a bad economy, like we've had for a few years now, the profit margins are non-existent or are barely noticeable. And so an extra thousands of dollars a month in the name of fairness to workers ends up causing businesses to struggle, and the bottom line is this. Quantity supplied ends up here, quantity demanded ends up here, and you end up, in this case, with a surplus of labor, and a surplus of labor in a marketplace where the workers are involved is called unemployment. Google it for yourself. Every time the minimum wage is increased, and politicians do it because they know the voters are ignorant. It's not the voters are stupid, they're ignorant. They're lacking knowledge about economics. They promise $9.50 or whatever. Some of us have asked, if Mr. Obama believes $9.50 would help people come out of poverty, why not make the minimum wage $30 an hour? Wouldn't that help more people come out of poverty? So you increase the minimum wage and the laws of supply and demand kick in, and it ends up causing higher unemployment for the very people that you were trying to help. But politicians love when their behavior is able to be masked by the outcome. Meaning, when this person is laid off by Burger King in Detroit, on their way home, they're probably mad at Burger King. They're probably not, this teenager is not driving home thinking, I'll bet you when the politicians raised the minimum wage to $9.50 an hour, that caused more people to come in and look for work, that caused a decrease in quantity demanded. Burger King couldn't make as much money, so I lost my job because of politicians in Washington, D.C. Most voters, most young people aren't going to be thinking that way. They're going to be thinking, wow, this mean company. And back to the economics of cruelty. Now, this worker who had been getting $6 an hour while they're unemployed, they're getting $0 per hour. So, to summarize, which is more cruel? To tell the $6 an hour person, go fix yourself and you won't earn $6. I used to earn $3.35 an hour working for Kentucky Fried Chicken in 1981 in Hugo, Oklahoma. Should I have looked at $3.35 and said this is unfair and just waited for politicians to raise it to $5 and then $7? I might still be at Kentucky Fried Chicken getting $7-something an hour right now, waiting for politicians to artificially give me a raise. No, I had to do just what you're doing right now. I had to go to college, improve my level of human capital so that the free market would say, okay, Chambliss, you're worth more than the minimum wage. Here's a job for you based on supply and demand conditions that's well above the minimum wage. So it would seem you could make the argument that the free market gives people more hope, where interfering with the free market gives people despair and gives them $0 an hour, gives them poverty as a result of government ignoring Adam Smith and the laws of supply and demand. I hope today's material on the market equilibrium process and interferences in the market equilibrium process has been useful to you. Again, this material applies to Chapter 6 in your book and to a portion of Chapter 8 in your book. And for my online students, this is material that will be on your midterm examination. Thank you, and have a nice day.